The fight or flight reaction is the source of all human suffering. Let me explain how it works. See, the fight or flight reaction is a behavioral modifier for animals. See, animals lack understanding. See, they don't really know things like life or death. And so their decisions are emotional and instinctive. And so, what the fight or flight does, in addition to all the changes to the body to prepare it for work, is it creates a tunnel vision. But tunnel vision isn't quite what it is. It's actually an exclusory awareness where the consciousness of the organism, the wakeful experience, shrinks. And so you have a greater space of sub-awareness consciousness. And so subconscious is not really the way to describe it because it's conscious, but it's sub-awareness. And what this does is it eliminates distractions, meaning the animal fixates on the other animal while the mind blurs out any type of reality that is unrelated to survival. The reason it does this is because animals would be distracted. And so let's say my dog Turbo encounters a mountain lion. Well, he gets the tunnel vision and his whole reality is consumed by the existence of the mountain lion. He enters into fight or flight and he gets scared and runs away. Now, what the mind of my dog must do is it must block out any sensory information or visual information or awareness that would lead my dog to do things that would not be relevant to survival. You see, my dog is not afraid of the lion or the mountain lion because it fears death, but it just has this fear that's compelling it to run. So it's not really conscious of what could happen, it just knows it's afraid. And so what happens though, if my dog was running and it didn't have everything blocked, it might pick up the scent of another dog on the bush and then want to stop and lift its leg, or it might see a cat and start chasing the cat. You see, if it stopped running because it was distracted, it would get attacked, and it would, most certainly not make it. And so the fight or flight, what it does is it takes the reality of the organism and then it condenses it and concentrates the entire experience of the outside world onto the threat. So my dog is listening only for the mountain lion behind it and making all of its moves based on the movement of the mountain lion. But you see, we still retain that dynamic. And why that's important to understand is it causes the genesis of a subjective experience, because the fight or flight is responsible for all the emotional and reactionary behavioral dynamics of human beings. And the problem is that human beings are not reacting to other animals, they're reacting to themselves. We're reacting to feeling not good enough. We're reacting to feeling broken. We're reacting to this thought that there's something wrong. And the thought that there's something wrong was the original thought that all children got when they had their first fight or flight reaction. Because we can think, it was automatic that all the thoughts that we would create after thinking there's something wrong would become pattern recognition paradigms. What this did is it created 30 or 40 of these anomalous thoughts that were just there contained within the first fight or flight reaction that got saved and stored and patternized in the same way animals are patternized other animals. You see, an animal does one animal at a time, but the human being has a flood of irrational and arbitrary thoughts. So a 4 or 5-year-old child will see the parents fighting, and the loud voice will trigger the child into a fight or flight, where suddenly the animalistic survival instinct patternizes the parents into dangerous. This creates the first experience of abandonment. And now the child feels alone because the caregivers have disappeared and are replaced by monsters, and it creates confusion because that's mom and dad, but now they're scary. So the child feels helpless, alone, frozen, stuck. It feels like I don't matter. It feels unlovable because of this state change. It thinks that it did something wrong. Something's wrong with me. Something's wrong with me is a description of the experience of being something's wrong that animals usually associate with external threats. And the child will feel not good enough for mom and dad. As this cools down, the child will try to figure out a way to survive these scary adults now, always needing to try to become good enough to make the parents happy, to keep the child from fearing the abandonment. And so this irrational thought now becomes the entire architecture of the external world, which each thought become an individual trigger that makes an invisible jungle. Now, in this invisible jungle, you can't escape the thoughts of not enough, and so the human being has to create an equally illusory future as the escape. And so every single person starts living into a hopeful future, needing to believe in themselves to overcome the thoughts of being inadequate and not enough, and then will idealize people, unable to see the reality of people through the tunnel vision. They merely evaluate people in their relevance towards all these triggers. Is this person going to make me safe? Am I going to be good enough for this person? In idealizing this person, they induct that person into the future, all the people into the future. And so heartbreak is really a collapse of the future that you depended upon as you tried to overcome yourself over and over and over. And you see, since we are projecting these thoughts onto reality, we're reacting to them. And since it's universal, we can all relate to heartbreak, abandonment, fearing the outcome of a test, because that test is a big test. Why? Because it'll trigger the not good enough, which is a survival grade fight or flight reaction paradigm that makes us perpetually seeking validation in a lifelong crusade of more. So human beings trying to fix themselves look at each other. And now psychology has merely been looking through the kaleidoscope of our own suffering back at ourselves, failing to recognize the anomalous nature of grown-ups that fear abandonment like children would, with the fear of being alone. That is why people will irrationally fear being alone, because they don't feel like they're good enough. They will have the same recreated fear that they created in childhood. And what I've discovered is the emotional fingerprint, the entire architecture of an individual's illusory external experience that reflects back upon them, this all-pervasive notion of needing to fix and change oneself and modify reality so it reflects good enough to keep us safe from our own reactions that we think come from reality. That's why we think it's trauma, because a severe reaction in childhood will have the same emotionality of a severe reaction in adulthood, and so we'll think you have daddy issues, because of course when you look at your past, you're always going to find some visual example of the same reaction, and as we try to process that trauma over and over and over, it makes no difference. Because it wasn't the trauma that caused this. It was the very first fight or flight reaction and the overarching experiential fear of life or death that became part of every single trigger, every single thought that the child created to try to explain what was wrong with them. It was like the initial guilt trip was the child inappropriately assigning personal responsibility for the actions of the adults. And every single human being did this. And this is why enlightenment came from meditation first, because meditation merely relaxed the sympathetic nervous system to cause the tunnel vision that contained the human consciousness to expand back into the normal conscious experience. And so while this mechanism makes sense for animals, it puts people into very rigid decision-making apparatuses of yes or no. Everything you're avoiding and procrastinating, that is the flight. Everything you're trying to overcome, that's the fight. And that's it. That explains the whole human experience.